Hello there and welcome. In the previous episode, we continued working on our questing system, so now we have most of the functionality working. We can create any quest that we want, we can place it on our NPC. In this episode, we're going to continue adding more things to the questing system. So the first thing we want to add is some UI. We want to create a quest menu to see all the active quests. And we also want to create some kind of quest tracker to see what are the requirements in real time. And if we're going to pick up some item, we're going to see it updated like in many other games. So in order to link the UI to our actual quests and to be able to manage all these quests from different NPCs altogether, then we're going to create a quest manager that will be a singleton, and it's going to be easier to control everything from this one place. So we're going to create an empty object and name it quest manager. Then we're going to create the same script. Next, we're going to turn it into a singleton. So let's delete all of this. Now we need to add a few things into our quest manager. So we have several variables. We have a list that is going to hold all the active quests. So each time we start a new quest, it's going to get added into this list. And then when we complete a quest, it will simply move to this other list. And this way we can display different kinds of quests. We can display our active quests and display our completed quests. Then of course we need a reference to the menu. We need to check if it's open. And we're going to have prefabs for each row of quests. So this quest row can have some kind of a name, it can have the rewards, it can have a tracking button, it can have different things, but we're going to save it as a prefab, and then we're also going to have a prefab of a completed quest, and you're going to see what I mean. And then we need a reference to the quest menu content, and this is just the area that our different prefabs are going to get instantiated inside this scroll view that we're going to create. So let's just make this capital. And then we're also going to have the content of the quest tracker, because the quest tracker is also going to have a scroll view, and we're going to instantiate the different quests that we want to track. But again, it's going to be much easier to understand when we actually create these things. Now inside the quest manager, we're going to create an image, and it's going to automatically create a canvas as well. Then we're going to expand this image a bit. We're going to set the background. And then we're going to create a title. So inside we're going to create a UI Text Mesh Pro. Then inside the image as well, we are going to create a UI scroll view, and it's going to create a bunch of things inside of it. Now we need to simply drag and position this scroll view to fit the entire view that we want. So it's really up to you, up to your UI. And basically inside of this scroll view, we are going to instantiate the different rows to see the different quests. Now, of course, you can do it differently. You can create maybe different tabs for active quests and completed quests. Maybe you want to do something else. We're going to keep it simple. We're going to have one list that is going to contain all the quests, and we're simply going to see the active quest and the completed quests. Now, as we select the scroll view, we will go over here to the scroll rec component, and we're going to disable the horizontal because we only want to use the vertical functionality of the scroll view. Then we're going to expand the viewport, click on the content, and we're going to add two components. First of all, it's going to be the content size fitter and the vertical layout group. Then we're also going to change the vertical fit to preferred size. Now inside this content, we want to create our actual prefab that we're going to instantiate each time. And the reason we're doing all of this is because we don't know how many quests we're going to have in this list. In the beginning, it's going to be empty, and then when we're going to accept our first quest, we're only going to have one quest. And later, we may have 100 quests over here. So we cannot hard code these quests over here. We need to add them each time we actually have a quest. So we're going to simply create a UI image, and you can see that it's already fitted inside. Then you need to simply drag it to fit the entire box and maybe make it bigger. And you can style it, you can change the background, you can add all the things that you want to display for your quest. Now I'm not going to do it again because I already did it, so I'm going to delete this image. And inside the prefabs, inside the UI, I already have this quest row, so I'm going to drag it inside the content, and you can see that we get this thing over here. And there's nothing special, it's just something that I created. So it's basically just an image. This entire quest row is an image with this red background. Then inside we have a quest name, which is a text mesh pro. We have a quest giver, which is also a text mesh pro. Then we have this button that is also just a button with a text that is saying tracking. And then we have an image, and inside we have a text that says rewards, and we have an image with an image of a coin, another image that is empty, and another image that is empty. And inside each one of these, we also have a text. So of course, most of this won't be relevant for you because maybe you're not even going to have coins. Maybe you're going to have XP. Maybe you're going to have 5 different items for rewards, so you need to change this entire view. Maybe you don't want to display images. Maybe you just want to have some kind of list. So you are going to have to change it accordingly. But if you want to follow me and do it the same way, just create it like that, and you can see it over here. So there's nothing special about it. I just don't want to create it all over again. And the way it's going to work is that we're always going to instantiate this prefab inside this list. So for example, when we accept our first quest, we're going to instantiate this quest row. So then when we have another quest, we can instantiate another quest row. So you can see that if I drag it inside the content, it will automatically place it underneath. Of course, you can also control all of this. So if you go to the content, you can actually change the spacing, you can change the padding. For example, you want some padding between both of them. So you go to top, 16. Oh yeah, this will make the padding for the top. And if you want to have spacing between them, you can change it here. So you can play around with it so it will fit your game. I don't need any spacing, so everything will be 0. And now if I'm going to duplicate this a lot, eventually it will simply go underneath, and that's why we have these scroll bars. So if we run the game for a second, and I'm just opening this because otherwise we won't be able to use the mouse, we can see that we have this scroll bar, and then we can simply check all the other prefabs. So we can even add 100 different quests, and they will all be underneath. Now, of course, after you create this quest row, simply drag it and make a prefab out of it, because eventually we are going to instantiate it inside our content. And in the beginning, all of this will be empty. If, for example, I'm going to delete all of this and I'm going to run the game, and now we only have one inside, then you can see that this scroll bar is gone because it is not needed. But of course, you can also make it visible anytime you want. So if you go over here, you can make it permanent, but we are using auto hide because we don't want to see it if we only have 1 or 2 items. Only when we actually need the scroll bar, we're going to make it visible, but it's going to happen automatically. And same goes for the horizontal, although we don't even need it in this case because we don't need to go horizontally, but I suggest not deleting this. Otherwise, it can do all kinds of strange things. It can just collapse this entire viewport. So even if you don't need this horizontal, simply don't touch it because you can see that eventually it's not going to be shown. Now we are also going to click on the viewport, actually on the scroll view, and we're going to disable the image because we don't want to see this background. And we can also change the color of the handle because this white color is not nice. So if we go inside the scroll bar vertical, inside the handle, we can change the color to something like and then we can do the same thing for the scroll bar itself over here. So now if we have a bunch of them, it will look much nicer this way. So you can customize it, and it's all about designing the UI, and that's something you will have to do on your own. The next thing we want to do is duplicate this entire quest row and have a similar one that is named quest row completed. Okay, so if I'm going to drag it inside, we have this quest row completed, and all you need to do is just create another copy of it, change the background to be darker, and then change this button to say completed. You can also make the color of the button less visible, so it will not even be interactable. So if we go inside and we click on this tracking button, we can also set this to be uninteractable, and you can see that it's grayed out because we want to have active quests, and then when we complete the quest, we want to have completed quests. So again, you can divide this into different lists, into different layouts. I'm simply going to display all of them in this one list. So then when you have the second variation of this quest row, simply create a prefab out of it, and then you're going to have both of them over here, and we're going to use both of them. Next, we need to create some kind of script that is going to sit on our quest row because we do want to have an option to populate these UIs. So we want to be able to populate and change the quest name, the quest giver. We want to change all of this information. We want to make this tracking interactable. So we need to connect all of these things. So for this, we're going to create a new script and name it quest row, and then you need to simply drag it on your prefab. So I'm going to do it as well. So I will go over here inside the prefab, and I'm going to add the script inside, and then the same with the completed version. And of course, we're using the same script. Inside the quest row script, we're going to add all of these references for the UI and a few other things. So all we have is a text mesh pro for the quest name, for the quest giver, for the coin amount, for the first reward amount, that. Then we also have the image. So all of these are simply references for all of these components. So we have a reference for this, for these images. We don't have a reference for the coin image because it's always going to be the coin and we don't need to change it. These we're going to change from the code, so we do want to have a reference to them. And then we also have a reference for each one of these texts, and we have a reference for this tracking button. And we also have two booleans to see if this quest row is actually active and if it's tracking. And we're going to use them later. So now we can save this. And let's just drag both of them back into the content. And we can find this entire script over here and also on this one. And now all we need to do is drag all the different references into this script. Now that we did all of this, we can apply these prefabs and save them, apply and apply. And we can delete them from the content. Now let's also click on our quest manager and let's add all of these references that we have. So the quest menu, we are going to drag this entire canvas. For the active quest prefab, we are going to drag this quest row. And for the completed quest prefab, we're going to drag the quest row completed version. And then inside the quest menu content, we need to drag this content object because we are going to instantiate these prefabs inside this content. And we also need this one, but we still did not create it, so we're going to deal with that later. Next, inside the quest manager, we want to have a method that is going to loop over all our quests and then instantiate them inside this quest menu content. So when we accept a new quest, it becomes an active quest, and it means that it basically enters into this all active quests, and then we're going to loop over all of this list, and we're going to add all of these quests into the list. But we're also going to do it for the all completed quest because we want all quests to be in the same list. The difference is that we're going to use the active prefab for these ones and the completed prefab for these ones. So let's create a method over here named refresh quest list. And over here, we're going to loop over these lists and instantiate these prefabs. So all we are doing inside this refresh quest list method is looping over this entire active quests list. And for each one of the quests that are going to be inside, we're going to instantiate this active quest prefab into this quest menu content. So we simply instantiate this prefab, and then we set this prefab to be a child of this quest menu content. And we put it at the 0 position because we don't want to change the positioning. Anyway, it's going to be controlled by this menu content. And then we access this prefab and we go into the quest row. And because we have this quest row script, we can also assign all the values for the different components. So we simply access this quest row, the quest name, the quest giver, these two booleans, the coin amount. And for now, I disable the sprites because we're going to deal with that later. And you may notice that I also have amounts for rewards. And I actually did not add any amounts for rewards inside the system. I do have these over here. I do have the UI. But if we go into our first NPC and we go into the quest info and we open it, we can see that our rewards are simply the item themselves. We don't have amounts for these rewards. But if you do want to add amounts, then you can also do it. And this way you can access them and just change them. And the way you are going to do it is simply by active quest info, and over here you're going to have the amount that you set inside the actual scriptable object. But we don't have all of this, so we're simply going to leave it empty. And because it's going to be empty, we are not going to see these numbers over here. Now, as I told you, we're also going to deal with the sprites later. Now we do want to set the quest name and the quest giver, so we don't have these yet inside our quest. So let's add them. Let's go inside our quest, and over here we can actually add them into the quest info, but we can also add them into the quest itself. So let's add it over here. And now if we open our first quest, inside the NPC, we can provide a name and provide a quest giver. So the quest giver is Milena, and the quest name would be something like Damsel in Distress. And of course, you're going to give it its own name. And now that we have this over here, we can also go back inside our quest manager and access this. So active quest, quest name, and active quest, quest giver. Now, it's not enough to have this refresh quest list method because we also want to actually add a quest to this list. So we're going to have a method. So we receive a quest, we add it into the all active quests, and then we run this refresh quest list. Now, to see that all of this works, we also need to call this method when we actually accepted a quest. Because when we accepted a quest, it should go to this thing, and then it should call this, and then we should see it on the quest menu. So let's copy this quest, and inside our NPC, we can go to the accepted quest method, and at the beginning, we're going to access the quest manager and call this method, and we need to provide it with a quest, and it's going to be the current active quest. So all of this we did in the previous episode. So we're simply using the current active quest to become an active quest, and then it's going to be displayed in the quest menu. So now we can delete this so we can see that we have an empty list. We can also close this canvas. And let's run the game. We can see this all active quest list, and right now it's empty, but if we start a quest and we actually accept and start a quest, we can see that there is something inside this list, and we can actually see the name of this quest. We can expand it, and there is all this information. And now, if I'm going to click on the canvas and make it visible. Later, of course, we're going to do it by clicking a key. But right now, if I'm going to make it visible, we can see this quests menu. And inside, we have all the information, the name of the quest giver. We get 25 coins. And also, we disabled these texts because we don't have amount to this rewards, but later we're going to also set these sprites. So we're going to basically have the rewards over here. So we know that everything is working. Next, we want to do the same thing, but for the completed quests. So we want to do all of this again for the completed quests. So we're going to copy all of this because we don't want to type it all over again. And we're just going to do a few changes. So all we did is change the name of the list we're looping and the thing that we're referencing. We also changed the prefab that we want to instantiate, and we simply access this completed quest. And now that we have all of this, so we basically set the active quests, we set the completed quests, but we also want to actually set a quest to become completed, because now we are adding it into this list, but how are we adding quests into this list? So for this, we're going to create another method. So very simple, we simply remove this quest from the active list and we add it into the completed, and then we refresh the list again. So if we had an active quest and we completed it, then we're simply going to call this method, and it's going to take it from this list and move it to this list. And now we're going to call this method as well when we actually completed a quest. So back inside the NPC, over here inside this receive reward and complete quest, at the beginning, quest manager, mark quest as completed, and we're going to pass in the current active quest. Now, if we did this and we actually marked it as completed, it will simply move the quest from this list and put it over here. But the actual prefab will still exist inside the content. So before we refresh the list, we also want to destroy all the old prefabs that are still sitting inside. So we destroy everything inside this content and then we do this calculation over again. Otherwise, the old prefabs are still going to be inside the content. And now if we run the game and we start a quest, it will add it into the list. But if we complete the quest, so let's pick up 3 sticks. 1, 2, 3. And let's complete the quest. And we open the menu. We can see that it became this completed prefab. And now we know that we completed this quest. Next, let's also deal with actually opening the menu because we're not going to do it manually each time. So let's just close it for now and go back into the quest manager. Let's add an update method over here. And I don't want to type everything because it's pretty long. So I'm just going to paste this. And it's basically the same thing we have inside the inventory system. Right? So when we want to close the menu, we check that the construction manager is not in construction mode. And then if it's closed, then we're going to open it. And if it's opened, then we're going to close it. So you already have this code. You simply need to change a few things. You also have it inside the crafting system, right? So it's always the same. So over here inside the update, we simply want to press on some kind of key, and I decided it to be the Q key because Q stands for quest. And then we check if it's not already open, and if we're not in construction mode, then simply set the quest menu to become active. Do all of these things with the cursor and lock it, also with the selection manager. So all of this already exists inside the inventory system, as I told you. And if it's the other way around, if it's already opened, then we simply want to close it. And because we added a new menu, we want to check if these ones are not opened. Otherwise, if one of them is going to be opened and we're going to close this one, then our cursor is going to get locked. So we also want to check if one of them is not closed. And we do the same thing inside the inventory system, but because we didn't have another menu, we only had the crafting system. And inside the crafting, we did the same thing with the inventory. But now that we have another menu, we need to check the other ones. So that's the code for opening the UI. And of course, we also want to disable the mouse movement when the menu is opened. So inside the mouse movement script, we're going to add another condition. If quest manager is not open, right? If it's not open. Because if it's open, we don't want to move the mouse. And we did it the same way for the menu manager, for the crafting system, for the inventory system. And now if I press on the Q key, it's going to open the menu. And if I press again, it's going to close it. But now we have this small problem that if we had another menu opened, before we managed to get by because both of them were in separate places, so they did not overlap one another. But now that we have this other menu, it's going to hide these ones. And there is no problem, we can simply close this. But if you don't want to deal with it, you don't want to always close this one, and maybe you have this one closed, and then you open this one, then you open this one, you can see that it opens in the background because the quest menu is in another canvas, and both of these are in another canvas. So if you want to use the inventory right now, you cannot see it, and you need to close the quest first. Now, for most of you, it's not going to be a problem because you're probably not going to have this kind of UI. You're going to have some kind of full screen UI, right? Like most modern games. If you do want to use these floating windows, I'm going to show you a small fix, but it's still not going to be a perfect fix. So you can simply open the menu manager and you're going to add a variable over here, public int current front. It's going to be equal 0. And then we're going to have a method public int set as front. And it's going to return the current front, and it will increase it by 1 each time. So now each time we open a menu, we are going to set the sorting layer to be higher than the previous one. So for example, if we go inside our quest manager, and after we set it to be active, we can also quest menu, and then we need to simply have a reference to our canvas. So we can go over here and just find the canvas. So game object, find, or actually transform, find canvas, game object. Then we want to access the component itself. So actually canvas, sort layer, sorting order, and then for the sorting order, we're simply going to call this method. So menu manager, instance, set as front, and it's going to return this current front and it's going to increase it by 1. So it's going to be 0 in the beginning. It's going to return it over here and it's going to put the sorting order of the canvas to be 1. But then if we want to open the inventory system, we can do the same. So over here, when we open the menu, we simply do inventory screen UI. But this time, if you look inside the canvas is actually the parent of the inventory screen. So we need to find the canvas inside the parent. So we can do get component in parent, canvas, sorting order, and we do the same, menu manager, set as front, and then we can copy this and do the same thing for the crafting system. So over here, when we open it, we are going to change the sorting order. And if we go back into the quest manager, we can actually make this simpler by saying, so we can just do it this way. It's much cleaner, right? We want to get the canvas from the child, and over here, we want to get the canvas from the parent. So let's save all of this. And now if we run the game, we can open the inventory, and then we can open the quest menu, and then we can open the crafting menu. And it's going to get on top. Then we can close the quest and open it again. It will automatically become in front of the rest. Now you notice that both of these will always go together. So if we close the crafting and we open it again, it will take the inventory with it. And that's why I told you that it's not a perfect fix, because both of these will always go together. And the reason is because both of them are under the same canvas. So if you do want to fix this, you simply need to move them into separate canvases. But that's just a fix for those of you that want to use these floating windows. Now that we are done with the menu, we can start working on the quest tracker. And the quest tracker will be some kind of UI that we're going to see on the screen. And it will just display the active quests. And this way we can actually see all the objectives in real time. And it's something we can find in almost every game. So inside the quest manager, we are going to create another canvas. So notice we are creating a brand new canvas over here. And we can rename it to be quest tracker. And then inside, we're going to create a UI scroll view. And we need a scroll view because we're going to be able to have a lot of different quests over here, and we don't want to hard code it. So it's going to be very similar to what we did with the menu. So we're just going to move it over here. Let's make it a bit bigger. And we're going to anchor it to the corner. Then we're going to position it a bit. Then on the scroll view, we're going to disable the horizontal as well, because we are only interested in vertical elements. Now we're going to click on the scroll view, expand it, expand the viewport, and on the content, we're going to add the vertical layout group and the content fitter. And we did the same thing inside the menu. Now we're going to change this to preferred size. And it's going to work the same way like the menu. We're going to instantiate some kind of prefab according to the amount of tracked quests. Now, even if we have 10 active quests, we don't have to track all of them together. Maybe we want to only track a few of them. So we are going to decide which quests we want to see in this window. So the process is the same inside the content. We're going to create some kind of image for the background. Then we're going to drag it over here, and you need to decide the size of the element. Then we are going to add a few other text views over here for the name of the quest, for some kind of description, and for the requirements. Now I'm not going to do it all over again because I already have this TrackerRow that I created. So I'm going to delete this. I'm going to drag this prefab inside the content. And this is what I created. Inside, I simply have a title, I have a description, and I have this area for the requirements because some quests will have more than one requirement, so we do want to allow it to have more room over here. Of course, you can make it look different. You can only show the requirements and the title. Maybe you don't need a description. Maybe you want to make it even smaller, but this is the way we're going to do it. Now, these are hard-coded, so we're actually going to change these values through the code the same way we did with the menu. And of course, when you're done with this prefab, just name it TrackerRow and then create a prefab out of it. Now we need to create some kind of script that will go on this TrackerRow the same way we have this QuestRow script, because we want to be able to access all of these components and change them. So on the TrackerRow, we're going to create a script. TrackerRow. And inside, we're only going to have 3 different variables for the elements that we have on this TrackerRow. And now we're going to open our TrackerRow and we're going to drag this script inside. Now we also need to add all of these references, so the title will go into the quest name, the description will go into the description, and the requirements will go into the requirements. And this way we can actually access these areas and change them through the code. Now we're going to make sure that all the changes are applied and we're going to delete it from our scene. Now if we click on the quest manager, we know that we still need a reference to the content of the quest tracker. So in order to not get confused, we're going to rename the content of the quest tracker to be something unique like quest tracker content. And then we're going to drag it into the quest manager. Inside the quest manager, we're going to have a reference to the prefab that we just created. So over here under the area for the quest tracker things, we're going to have a public game object TrackerRow prefab. And we already have a reference to the content over here. So now we're going to save this and we're going to drag the prefab that we created into this slot. Now we're also going to create a list that is going to contain all the quests that we are tracking. Next, we want to create 2 methods. One will add a quest into this all tracked quest list, and the other method is going to remove a quest from this list. So all we are doing is adding a quest into this list and removing a quest from this list. After we do this, we also want to refresh our tracker list, because if we actually added something into the list, we want to see it in the tracking list. And if we removed something, we no longer want to see it on the UI. So we're going to create this method, and it's going to be the same exact method for both of them. And it's kind of long, so I'm just going to paste it. I'm also going to provide it to you in the description. So inside this refresh tracker list method, we are going to simply remove all the children that we had there before, and we did the same thing with our menu list, right? We destroyed all the children that we previously had so we can add the new relevant children. So we're going to do the same thing here, and then we're going to loop over all the quests inside this all tracked quests list, and we are going to instantiate our TrackerRow prefab, and we're also going to set it to be a child of this quest tracker content. So all of this is very similar to what we did with the menu, but this time we want to set it into the quest tracker. Then we're going to access this element, and we're going to access this TrackerRow script, and now we can set the different UI. So we can set the quest name, so we simply go into our tracked quest and we get the quest name, and we don't have a quest description in our tracked quest yet. So let's do it. Let's go to our quest class, and over here we're going to add and now the error is gone. So we simply access the quest description and we set it into the UI. Now we simply want to display all the requirements. So you can see over here that we have a list of these different requirements. So for now, we only have one requirement that rabbit hides 0 out of 7, but we can also have more requirements. So we want to get our first requirement, and then we also want to get the amount needed, and we also want to get the amount of items we actually have inside our inventory. So that's what is going on over here. But we also want to check if we even have more than one requirements, because if we don't have more than one requirements, we only want to show the one requirement, right? And otherwise, we want to show 2 requirements, and if you have more requirements, you can add it over here. So we simply check if the tracked quest, if it's not empty, then it means that we do have 2 requirements, so we want to display 2 requirements. But if it is empty, right? So if we don't have a second requirement, then we only want to show 1 requirement. So all we do is set a text to our requirements field, and we simply get the name of the first requirement. Then we add this 0 slash, and then after the 0, we set the first requirement amount. Now, of course, this is not going to work because it's always going to be 0, but later we're going to change this 0 to actually display the amount of items we have in our inventory. So all we are doing here is saying first requirement item. So for example, stick. And then it says 0, so it's going to be 0. Then we have this slash, and then the amount of the first item. So it's going to be 3 in our case. So this is what we do over here. We simply display a string using these things. And at the top, if we have 2 requirements, we simply do the same thing, but it will simply display another string underneath it, right? We use this n slash to create a break. And we also need to actually set the quest description for our quest because we never did that. So we go into our first NPC and we go to the first quest. So we need to also set the description, and it's going to be something like help Milena gather materials to impress her father. So some kind of short description for the quest. And now we want to actually call these 2 methods. So we want to start tracking a quest as soon as we start it. If we don't want to track it, we can disable it later, but in the beginning, it will automatically start tracking the quest. So we're going to call it when we actually add a quest into the active quests list. So let's find it. We have it over here. We add a quest into the all active quests, but before we refresh the list, we also want to call this track quest method. And we want to pass in the quest. So it's going to add a quest into the all active quests, and it's also going to add the quest into the tracking list. And inside, it's going to refresh the UI, and also here, it's going to refresh the quest menu. And we want to also call the onTrack quest when we actually completed the quest. So over here, onTrack quest, and we pass in the quest. So when we completed the quest, we move it into the all completed quest list, and then we also untrack it. So now the quest tracker should work. Let's just remove this background. So let's go to the viewport, or actually the scroll view, and remove the image. And remember that if we're not using these scroll bars, they're not going to show. So if we run the game, we are not even seeing this quest tracker, but when we start a quest, it should appear over there. So we start a new quest, and we can see that it actually appeared over here. So we have the name of the quest, we have the description, and we have the requirements. Now, if we complete the quest, it should disappear. And of course, we can also see it over here, right? So let's pick up the sticks and let's just complete the quest. For now, the UI is not reactive, so we can't actually see the sticks amount increase, but we're going to deal with that in a minute. So let's submit the quest. And now that we completed the quest, this tracker quest UI is empty. And of course, we can also see that this is completed. Now we also want to update the actual UI. So if we pick up a stick, we want to see that we have 1 out of 3 sticks. And later we're going to see 1 out of 7 hides and whatever requirement you have. So we're going to open the quest manager and we're going to create a simple method that is going to loop over our inventory and check how many items we have of the same name. So if we want to check how many sticks, it will simply return us an integer with the amount of sticks. So if you want to do it really professional, you should create this method inside the inventory system because it deals with the inventory. Even if we're just going to use it inside the quest manager, it's still a good practice to place it inside the inventory system. Now, of course, you can also place it inside the quest manager. It's really up to you. It's going to work either way. But I'm going to place it inside the inventory system. So at the bottom, we're going to create this new method. So all we do is create an integer counter, and then we loop over all the items inside the item list. And this item list is the item list that we have inside the inventory system that contains the names of all the items inside our inventory. So we loop over all of these items, and if the name of the item is the name that we provided, then it's going to increase the counter, and eventually it's going to return the amount of items. So if we had 3 sticks inside our inventory, it would go and find 3 sticks. It will increase the counter 3 times, and it's going to return 3 from this method. So let's save this and go back to the quest manager. And now all we need to do is call this method instead of this 0. Now, there's a lot of code over here, and we can make it cleaner. But for now, we're not going to worry about it. So all we need to do is call this method over here instead of the 0. So we're going to add another plus sign. And over here, we need to access the inventory system and call this method check item amount. And now we need to provide it with an item name. And as I told you, it looks a bit messy, but we're going to fix this. And now we're going to do the same thing over here. So let's copy all of this. Instead of this 0, so let's add plus sign over here. Let's call this method. Let's remove this 0. And then let's pass in the first requirement item. And we're going to do the same thing over here. So instead of the 0, we're going to call this method and we're going to pass in the first requirement item. Now let me just clean this code a bit. So now it looks much better. All I did was save all of these references into these short variables and then I changed their names. So everything is the same, but it looks cleaner. And now it should simply display the name of the item. Then it's going to find the amount of items. So for example, 1, and then it's going to do this slash, and then it's going to check the amount required. So 3, and it's simply going to create this string. So that's what we're doing here, but instead of hard coding the 0, we're actually checking how many of this item we have in the inventory. So all of this is going to get refreshed when we start tracking a quest or when we stop tracking a quest. But we also want to refresh this list when we actually pick up a new item or if we move an item from our inventory, because we do want to see these changes in real time. So we need to call this method each time we actually pick up an item. So inside the inventory system, over here, when we add something to the inventory, at the bottom, when we refresh all the other lists, we're also going to refresh this list. So quest manager, instance, refresh tracker list. And let's copy this. And then we're going to move to the remove method. So remove item. And at the bottom, we also refresh the other lists. So we're going to refresh this list as well. And maybe I'm forgetting other places we should call this method, but we're only going to find out when we actually encounter it. So now if we run the game and we start this quest, we can see that the UI is actually displaying the content of the inventory because we have 0 sticks. So now if we pick up 1 stick, we can see that it increases to 1, 2 sticks, 3 sticks. And even if I'm going to craft something using these sticks, for example, an axe, then we can see that the sticks went to 0 because we have 0 sticks in the inventory. We also need to create a small space between the stick and the 0, but otherwise everything is working. So let's go back into the quest manager and create a small space over here between the name and the amount and over here. Okay, so now we have this space over here. Next, we also want to actually enable and disable the tracking. So when we take a new quest, it will automatically start tracking the quest. But if we open our menu and we drag a prefab inside, we have this tracking button. We basically want to click on this button and then it's going to untrack the quest. And when we click on this button again, it's going to track the quest again. So if we open our TrackerRow script, and this is the script that sits on this prefab that we have over here, then we can see that we have a reference to this tracking button. So we're going to add the functionality into this script. So we're going to create a start method. And we're going to create a non-click listener on this button. So all we are doing here is adding a non-click listener on this tracking button. So when we click on it, it will check If it's already tracking, then we want to set it to false, and we want to set the text of this button to be not tracking. So over here, we want to see not tracking. And if it's not tracking, then we want to set it to be tracking and change it to say tracking. Now, of course, all of this should only be relevant if the quest is actually active, because if the quest is completed, there is no point of actually tracking it. So let's also surround all of this. Click here, snippet, surround with, if, and we're going to check if it's also active because we have this boolean over here. So only if this quest is active, then change the naming of the button and set it to be tracking false or tracking true. But this is not enough because we also want to actually call these two methods. We want to track the quest and we want to untrack the quest, and we want to refresh the tracker list. But in order to call these methods, we need to provide them with the quest. So over here, we don't have a reference to the quest. So for this, we need a reference for the actual quest that is getting displayed on this quest row. So over here, let's just add a reference, public quest, this quest. And now in order to set this quest over here, we go back into the quest manager. And over here, when we loop over all the active quests and we set all of these things into the quest row, we also want to add the active quest. So over here at the beginning, Q row, this quest equals to the active quest that we have over here. And now this quest row will know what is the quest that is getting displayed. And now we can go over here and call this method. So quest manager untrack quest, and we can provide it with this quest. And over here, quest manager track quest, this quest. Let's save this and let's see that everything is working. So now we open our quest menu, it's empty. We start the quest and we can see that the quest tracker is displaying our quest. We can also see that we have an active quest over here. And now if we don't want to track the quest, if we don't want to see it over here, we can simply click on this button. It will say not tracking and it will remove it from this list. And then I do want to start tracking it, so I'm going to click on it and it's going to start tracking the list. And of course, if we complete the quest, it will disappear from here and we won't be able to even change it anymore. So let's do it. Let's just complete the quest. And you can see that the sticks are going up in the UI. And now the quest is completed. It says completed. And because we checked if the quest is active to actually make this functional, it's not going to do anything. And everything is working. Now there is these sprites for the rewards that we need to take care of, but we're going to do it in the next episode because I don't want this episode to get very long. But other than that, everything is working. And of course, we are only testing out with one quest, but if you had more quests and more NPCs, everything should work together. So we're actually done with the questing system. Now, of course, there is a lot more that we can add. I just showed you the basic way we create it and connect everything, but you can open your imagination and create more sophisticated UI. You can have more options, more dialogues. You can do whatever you want as long as you actually understand how everything is working. In the next episode, I'm also going to do something very cool and very special for the NPC, and we're actually going to make the NPC talk with us. So we're going to create voiceovers and we're going to learn how to add it into our NPC script. So Thank you for watching. Please subscribe. It will support me a lot. And please leave a like. It will also help me a lot. And see you next time.